Okay. Let's see. You tell me how that volume is. And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we're going to be looking at another one of my very, very favorite artists and making a painting based or inspired upon one of their greatest hits. And it's really one of the very first things that they ever did as an artist. So today we're talking about Jasper Johns, and Jasper Johns is about as close as you can get to a living legend in the art world. Jasper Johns he's got to be about 90, 91, 92 years old. We'll take a look at his bio here in a second. But he has been he is one of the most interesting artists alive today. Because he has sort of seen everything. He has seen the two largest art movements that have happened over the course of the past 100 years unfold, and he's been a big part of really both of them. So this is the image that we're going to be painting. This is White Flag from 1955. It's not the exact dimensions of the American flag, because we'll talk about that in a second here. But it's what fits on a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, which you can print out and then transfer onto a canvas, showing the method I'm going to show you in just a few minutes. Maybe before we get into, and so here's the outline. It's pretty straightforward. This would be, if you were going to try to draw one of these, this would be one of the more relatively straightforward and easier ones to draw. Let me see, get this to fit on the page. There we go, back. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at actually this is the Dropbox. And if you click on a link down below, it'll take you to this Dropbox folder, and you'll see all these names here. These are all these artists. These are paintings we've already done in the course so far. So if you want to do Whistler's Mother, or Batman, Robert Bateman, learn how to paint an eagle. A.Y. Jackson, one of the group of seven, really the founder of the group of seven. James Gurney, who I think he's a fellow YouTuber and probably one of the most knowledgeable persons alive when it comes to color theory. Anyway, so this is where we're going to look at this, but just so you know, we're doing 4 separate Tom Thompson paintings this week on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I'm going to be busy the next little while, and then we're celebrating Stampede with a couple of Western artists. We're going to Quebec for Marcel Ferrand and Philip Guston, and then we're doing 5 or 4 Van Gogh paintings to celebrate the anniversary of his death as well, Spider-Man, etc. So look at all these here coming down the pipeline over the next couple of months. I'll also let you know that there's a private Facebook group just for people who are watching right now, and people uploading their videos. Look at that cool painting Josh did. Wow, that's cool, Josh. And I see you here in the chat, here to celebrate U.S. Independence Day today. Today's July 4th. Wow, cool. Look at it. So what I love is, look at how much all of this artwork, this is a painting that we did in class, but a couple of the other ones are projects that people are working on their own. And in the next short little while here, we are going to do a feedback session where I'm going to take a look at your paintings and give you some constructive criticism on how to improve them. A lot of congratulations, because anyone who's spending their time making art is a hero in my books, as far as I'm concerned. I think the world would be a much better place if all of our leaders sat down once a week, couple times a week, and made a painting or a sculpture or played violin or something, right? Anyway, here's Jasper Johns. Jasper Johns, born in 1930, so age 91. I wasn't too far off, from Georgia. And like I said, he was at the crux of the switch, the big, because essentially in American art, or globally really, you had these two, the modernist movement that was abstract expressionism. In fact, let's just click on this abstract expressionism. Come on, let's see some artwork here. There's Barnett Newman. Who are some of the most famous? Well, Jackson Pollock, but how come we don't see Jackson Pollock painting here? So here's Rio Pell. We did a Rio Pell painting. Anyway, abstract expressionism was a very formalist approach to painting, and it was all about just the paint on the canvas, right? Most of the paintings had literally no titles. Often abstract expressionist painters would just title their painting Untitled, or Number 4, or Number 20, 1952, etc. And they were all about really flattening the canvas, getting rid of illusionistic space. And illusionistic space is what we talk about when we think of the illusion of space on a canvas. So, like a lot of the paintings we've been painting, like here's our Star Wars painting, right? That we did about a month ago for May the 4th. Star Wars Day, right? So this is an illusionistic space, right? This canvas is flat, right? So what we've done is we've created the illusion that there's Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, and they're fighting with lightsabers in this space on the Death Star, right? But again, it's flat. That's not actually happening on this page. Sounds obvious, but what happened is, kind of beginning around the early 20th century, Kazimir Malevich and a number of other painters started to paint totally abstract or non-representational. And so rather than these globs of paint representing Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, the globs of paint represent nothing but nothing, right? So it's not like you look at it like, oh, I see a face there. It's like, no. We don't want to recognize anything. We just want to see color and shapes on the canvas. And so some of Jasper Johns' earliest paintings are abstract expressionist influenced, right? And he, along with Robert Rauschenberg, another fellow American from the South as well, were some of the very first people to start to imagine, like, what, because abstract expressionism took over the world, right? Even some of my teachers were abstract expressionist painters. And so from the early 1940s until really, there's still some abstract expressionist painters alive today, but really the movement lasted until the early 60s. And Jasper Johns, Robert Rauschenberg were the first two people, really the most famous of them. There's other people in France and in Japan who started to kind of imagine, what is the alternative to this? Well, the alternative to full non-representation, totally abstract paintings is figurative work, right? In fact, early pop art was called the New Figuration, or the New Figure Movement, because it was all about putting images back into the art. But these guys said, you know what, like, just painting a painting of somebody's face, well, that's happened many, many times before. What is an image that is relevant to today? And people like Jasper Johns said, what about the images that are in newspapers, that are in magazines, that are flying on flagpoles, right? Jasper Johns he was in the American military. I think I'm not sure if he saw active combat. But he would have gone through all the I think he did his whole service. He was discharged with honors. And when he came back, these are the very first paintings that he makes, is the Flag series as well as this Target series. And here's, obviously these are all images of his work. And this number series, he did a lot, was kind of obsessed with numbers. And you can see those early paintings, very, very colorful. And then he kind of goes through periods where they get kind of monochrome. And then some of the colors kind of start popping back through the darkness. And then we get kind of moments of these really bright colors coming through. And then he's going back to some of this imagery. Artists often do that, just like musicians might kind of quote some of their earliest work. So Jasper Johns is really acknowledged as really one of the very first pop artists, and he and Robert Rauschenberg kicked the door down and made it possible for artists like Andy Warhol, David Hockney, Roy Lichtenstein, and the Nouveau Realiste in France. So again, like I said, the French version of pop art was called the New Realists, the Nouveau Realiste, right? The people who are bringing realism back into art after going through 2 decades of abstract, non-representational painting. And you can see, it's not quite as overt as Andy Warhol with the soup cans and Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley, but you can certainly see this is the beginning to where we are really right now, where pop culture and art are now totally interwinding, right? And people are taking from pop culture and putting them into artwork, and then people are taking artwork and pulling it into advertisement and then back and forth, right? It's really interesting how but anyway, none of that would have happened without Jasper Johns. And he's still alive. Here's an article, a recent one, from just a couple years ago. I put a link to it in the description, from the New York Times, just talking about what he's been up to over the past, because I think, it's interesting, he has outlived almost everyone of his generation, and the generation, obviously generation before, but even the generation after him. And here's the painting that we're going to be working on today, White Flag. So there's more links to look at, but I think let's just jump into the painting, because I want to get started here. So let me cue up, because I want to show how I transferred this image. Okay, so I'm going to go to the full screen here and talk over this while it's happening. So what we're looking at here is, I get these canvases. They're 9x12 size, and then I put some gesso on them. Let's kind of go back. Here's a bottle of white gesso. And you can get these canvases from the dollar store. The gesso, you have to go to an art supply store, or you can order from Amazon. I put some on there, and then I give it a quick sanding. Here you can see I sand a whole bunch of them all at once. Sand, 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 sand. Oh, my arms are getting sore, all that sanding. And then here's the painting we did just the other day. And, well, let's scroll through here. And then here we are. So what I want to do is I'm going to line this painting up. And I'm also moving it off to the side, right? So you can see that there's extra space on that right-hand side, just because, there's these stripes on this side. This is not right in the middle of the flag, right? But I did leave a little bit of an edge around here in case, maybe just like we did with the early version of the Quebec flag, if you want to put like a border or something around that, which would be, not uncommon for flags. Flags sometimes, especially, flags that you might see, at the White House or something, might have kind of a yellow fringe around the edge. So anyway, And then you can see I'm taking some carbon paper. You can use graphite paper, same thing. You can use two-sided or one-sided, it doesn't matter. And then I'm kind of getting it nice, because also you want to make sure that it's actually placed under wherever you're going to draw. So this is all pretty self-explanatory. You sort of trace all the way around here. And then I used a ruler to get all of these lines, right? And then we'll just let that play. So then you peel it off. Ta-da, you got your lines. Excuse me. And then I then took my ruler, let's see here, and just extended these lines just so they go edge to edge. And then did I include, okay, so here's where I'm also drawing a little border around the edges as well, because I think I will put a little fringe around those sides. Okay. So, why is that? Okay. Okay, so here is, let's just close that. So here is the result. This is the carbon paper I'm using has carbon on both sides, so it kind of needlessly puts an image on the back side of the paper. If you should want it, you know, if you wanted to do, I don't know, the other side of the flag and paint this side, you could have a two-sided canvas for, maybe you want to hang it in your window, right? So that could be something you want to do, so that one side isn't just this kind of blank side, right? Again, you can see if you want to get the exact one that I'm using, this Arteza 9x12 canvas, there's a link in the video description below for that. Now, I might keep this. I was debating whether to do 2 paintings today, and then that's usually where I trip myself up. So, another thing I want to talk about before we launch right into making, or actually we'll put some paint on here, and then I'll do a digression so that we can get things up and running as quickly as possible. So I'm just going to put a bit of this warm yellow onto the canvas. This is usually what I do these days on basically every single painting we make. It just makes for a nice warm glow that comes through the paint. Even if you can't see the yellow there, it's going to affect all the colors on top, unless you really put a thick layer of white over top. Otherwise, you'll see this give your colors just a bit of an extra bit of glowing warmth, which I like. Some people don't like it, and if you don't like it, then you can skip this step entirely. The reason I put some water in there is to also speed up the drying time, make it a little bit more transparent. If I was just to put the thick paint on top of here, it could take a little bit longer to dry. And since I'm here on camera, I'm doing all this live, I want to kind of pick up the pace as much as possible. The other thing I'm doing right now is I'm painting all my edges. Okay, there we go. All done that. And just before I do anything else, I'm just going to clean that brush so it's not sitting on my table full of paint and then slowly hardening and getting ruined. Okay. So, and then I sometimes just like to give the table a little wipe. Okay. So one of the techniques that Jasper Johns is very famous for using is called encaustic. And encaustic is a process where you take wax, usually like a high quality artist's wax, a beeswax, and then you melt it down on a hot plate, and then you add usually powdered pigment, and then you mix it together, and so you have this molten hot wax that you can brush onto the canvas. And then of course, just like wax, it because it is wax, it dries within, depending on how thickly you put it on there, usually within like 5 to 15 seconds, right? Even if you got a fairly thick blob of wax, unless you're in like a really, really hot climate, it's going to dry very fast. And that was one of the things that Jasper Johns really, really liked about that process. There's some interviews you can find. There's lots of information. Jasper Johns is one of the most famous artists who ever lived. So there's lots of video, there's lots of interviews, documentaries, etc. on him on the web. And you could see him talking about that and why he chose to use encaustic. I think part of it is that he was a bit of an outsider when it comes to making art. So I think I think that's a you know, when you're not part of the art establishment, you might not even know what the quote-unquote rules are, and therefore you sometimes, if you don't know what the rules are, then you just are just breaking them left and right. And because encaustic is a technique that hasn't even, I mean, there are people, there's other YouTubers out there who do artwork just entirely with encaustic, but there's not. I'm trying to think if I can think of another very famous artist who is known for encaustic. I can't. I mean, in fact, since I'm talking about all of this, let's just take a quick search here. So one of the reasons, okay, so when we go all the way back to the origins of encaustic painting, it is one of the earliest forms of painting because, you know, wax is a fairly common substance, right? And it's a relatively easy material to make and to use. So artists have been using it for a long time, and you can also collage with it, which is another thing Jasper Johns did, which I was contemplating doing, and I don't think I will. I think we'll keep today's class fairly simple, being a holiday. But you can see people have used it for murals. Yeah, I mean, here we have all these. I don't even recognize him. Tony Sherman I do, but let's see, do we recognize any other famous artists? No. So really, Jasper Johns is Mr. Encaustic. He's the one who embraced this medium, and again, you can watch lots of videos of people showing how it's done, but it just looks at, you can basically paint with encaustic just like you would with acrylic or any other material. It's just the fact that it dries like white, or, you know, like a hot glue, basically. It would be kind of similar. Anyway, one of the things that I am going to use is some heavy gel. I'm going to mix this into some of my paint. And I had some molding paste around here that, of course, right before the show started, I couldn't find it. But molding paste is another medium which you can mix into your paint. In fact, let's just so this is what it looks like. can of this molding paste, and you can mix it into your paint and then paint over, or you could paint it on and it dries usually 90% clear, a little bit foggy, and then you could paint over top of it. So what's kind of fun with using your heavy gel or molding paste is that you can build up thick textured surfaces on your canvas. So let's get right to this. I think because this is still a little bit wet, so let me just blow dry that real quick. So, yeah, you know what? I am going to do some collage today. I'm going to do some collage, just for fun, and I wasn't planning on it, but I'm going to do it. So I'm going to get some paper. Where's my newspaper? Now that I've built all this stuff here, I've moved things around. So I'm going to take. This is the local Vancouver. Entertainment listings magazine, and ideally, when you're doing collage, it's interesting to kind of think about what would be some of the if you're going to choose something from the newspaper, what might be the text or imagery that you're going to use for your collage. So, let's just see. I'm going to cut some out of this paper here. I could just take this whole thing and I'm going to cut it into some strips. I don't know if I'm going to do a lot of this, but I thought it might just be kind of fun just to do a little bit of it. And I'm just kind of guessing on the size of this here. I mean, ideally, that's what would be kind of good is if I chose something like the New York Times, like an American newspaper, to do this. But this will be fine. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to cut a few more of these strips, and then I'm going to glue them on with some Mod Podge. We need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these. Actually, see if we can just tear that. We don't even need the X-Acto knife. So the use of collage, it also has a long history in art, and Jasper Johns certainly wasn't the first one to use collage. But again, I think this is part of his way of sort of rebelling against the prevailing abstract expressionist movement that had taken over the fine art world, including the art schools. You know, it's like, what could I do that would be the exact opposite of what everyone else is doing? If every single other person is making paintings that don't look like anything, what are my options? It's almost like he made himself a list, and it's like, okay, well, if there's no images, then I'm going to fill my canvases full of images, with so many images that, like a newspaper, these are images, and images and text, which is like another thing that would have made, you know, abstract expressionists blush. You know, like, oh, not only is he using images, but he's collaging things from the newspaper. Like, oh, what a scandal, right? Okay, so, this Mod Podge. If you're ever having a hard time opening these things up, I like kind of go around and try to like crack. There we go, and it just turns just like that. I'm gonna pour a bit. Actually, I'm gonna put it right here with my yellow paint, because you can mix paint into the Mod Podge. In fact, not just, why not let's put another color there. What color should we put in there? Let's put some warm red in here as well. And then let's mix this up. So we'll have kind of like an orangey color in our Mod Podge here. And then now I'm trying to decide, do I want to put this, how should we go about this? I wonder if should I just paint it over everything? I think I'm gonna paste it. Here, and then so this will be actually where the white stripes would be, right? And I'm gonna let my fingers get kind of messy. So again, this is just Mod Podge with some paint mixed into it. Part of Jasper John's process is the messiness and the embrace of the kind of goopy messiness, but then sometimes cleaning it up afterwards with like, especially today's painting, right? So it kind of can begin very loose and goopy and messy, but by the end it's going to get more refined. Okay. So I was thinking, if you don't have collage or you don't want to use collage, you could just use some kind of a paste to build up a thicker layer, and then just put all sorts of wild colors under here. Like, I think this is how I'll begin the base of this painting. And if you want, I didn't like what was there, so I'm just going to go and add this, squish it right together like that. The reason why I'm just sort of doing little rows at a time rather than the whole thing is so that it doesn't dry on me too fast. It's still very hot here, so I don't want to have everything dry up on me. And again, you see how there's little blobs and drips, and I'm painting over certain things. Remember, everything's going to get covered with white towards the end here, so. The one thing, when you're using Mod Podge, you probably don't want to put big, like, too thick of paint on. You kind of a nice layer, but not your goopiest, thickest paint that you can manage. And this is, I'm really enjoying myself, so I'm debating just in my mind, do I want to do the other stripes as well? Yeah, maybe we'll just continue right along here. Okay. Now, as I said, like, we're going to be covering this with paint, but maybe not every single, but there's going to be little pieces and parts are going to come through here. So, and we can even sand some of this back off later. I seem to have cut like just the exact amount that I need. The other thing too is if somebody tries to read this, it'll be very confusing, but it could make for some really interesting abstract compositions. It reminds me of William S. Burroughs and Brian Geisen, who were writers during around the same time, affiliated with the Beat Poets. I'm not sure what the relationship between Jasper Johns and the Beat writers was, but I imagine there was some kind of conversation, because they were exploring some similar territory. I'm a huge Jack Kerouac fan. His book On the Road had a big impact on me many years ago when I first read it when I was in college. Okay, So I've got that. I mean, it looks kind of gross, right? All that red bleaching through. So that's going to take a few minutes for that to dry. Let's take a look at the original again and just see if we can use our detective minds to kind of read into this. Now, this is the highest resolution version of the painting that I could find online. But again, if we were to look really close at this image, you would see different kinds of things collaged underneath here. So he built up quite a lot of texture and then put the encaustic on top, and then with the encaustic you can then scrape some of that wax off. You can sand some of it. It doesn't work that well, but you can draw back into it, and it's a great way of building up a lot of texture very fast because, like I said, wax dries very quickly. So while that's drying, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take some heavy gel, and I don't have a palette knife out here. Do I have a popsicle stick nearby? Use a blue popsicle stick for Independence Day. So let's take. So this is our heavy gel, and you can see when I take it out here, it is, you know, it's not going to come off, right? It's thick, goopy, medium, a gel which you can mix into your paint. So let's we'll see how much I need. I don't know if I'll use all of that. So, oh, the blue is coming off of it, so I think I will end up using lots of it. See, sometimes I don't like putting paint back into the container, so because it can taint the rest of the container. So I'm going to take this gel, and then let's zoom in just so you can see. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to build up a little bit of texture into these stars here. If you don't have any kind of gel like this, you could just try to... I'm going to do this kind of quickly. It'll probably take me about 5-10 minutes. And then as it dries, I'm going to just start putting kind of basically some random colors over top of all of this. And then so that we can kind of see what it starts to look like. So, because I think by the end, what we want to be able to do is kind of scrape away. Well, we're going to put all these kind of crazy colors. We can scrape and sand and do all sorts of fun stuff to it. And then then we start putting some white over top, and kind of get close to the look of the Jasper Johns artwork. Right, so the great thing with the heavy gel is we're going to see a lot of this texture all the way until the very end of the painting. Because often what happens with acrylic is acrylic has like a self-leveling agent in it, which means that it will try to, even if you paint big clumps of it, it will try to kind of shrink down and level out. And sometimes that's exactly what you want, and then sometimes that's frustrating because you're like, oh, I built up this really cool texture, or there's a really cool kind of a peak, as we might call it, as it's called, where you've got like the texture of the paint kind of coming off the surface, and then that it just disappears, right? And that can be kind of a bummer when you're really hoping that that texture would survive, and then you come back to your painting the next day and it's all gone. Once this kind of stuff dries, you can carve into it a little bit. You can cut into it, sand it. The molding paste is better suited for it than the gel. The gel's going to take a little bit longer to dry, hopefully, because it's pretty hot in here. I got my fan on full blast. That my hope is that it won't take too long. Just zoom back out a bit. I'm definitely doing this at about as sloppy as a way possible. There's, I could do this more carefully and do a really bang up job of it, but my goal is not is mostly just to show you how this kind of technique could work, so that if you wanted to use it, you kind of have some of the you've seen it done a little bit here. So this should take, depending on how thick you apply it, around 20 to 30 minutes to dry mostly through. We'll see how close that is. But we can paint, even with it, without it being completely dry, we can paint over top of it. The great thing with acrylics is that they have a great deal of stretchability or elasticity. You can paint on a canvas and then take it and roll it up, which is not recommended, but it's likely that the paint will kind of survive that kind of abuse. Whereas oil paint, you'll basically just, it'll start cracking and falling apart, because oil paint dries to like when it's finally dry, it can take a long time to dry, but once it's finally dry, it's like super stiff and doesn't like to be moved or anyway. So let's see, let's steal a little bit from some of these. Just cleaning it up here a little bit. Kind of shards or something in there. Okay, and then I'm going to take some more of this and spread it around on here. So let's zoom back out. So really, what I want is I'm just going to kind of make a little bit of texture going kind of left and right. Not too much. And I can mix this into the paint later. I'll probably do a little bit of that as well. So you can see that I can just put this on. When it's dry, this will just be totally clear with like some kind of lumps and stuff all over it. So what I'm trying to get is these raised bits in between the stripes. I thought, just in my mind, thinking like that would look kind of cool. It's not working too well, but it doesn't have to be everywhere. As long as I get a few that work and get that effect that I'm going for, that will make me happy. Cool. I can see it starting to kind of dry a little bit and get these little ridges happening. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to clean that brush off so that it's kind of like a glue that we're putting on here, so we want to try to avoid having wet glue on our paintbrushes. Paula says, if you don't have gel, you can mix cornstarch and water, making a good homemade gel. Interesting. I've never heard that before. That could be kind of cool. I don't know the long-term viability of that, but certainly as a way of a solution just to kind of participate like this, that would work if it works, I guess. Okay, so I'm gonna blow dry this. So just I'm going to continue blow drying here in a second, but I just wanted to say that, you know, the thin areas of the gel are all dry already. So, and it's some of those brush strokes have been locked in and sealed. Some of the, I think the places where you could see that white, that's still wet, right? As I said, when it dries clear. So I can see, like, most of this is all dry in here, but like these areas, like there's a kind of a skin over top of them that is kind of dried, but it's like kind of a pussy inside. So, and I saw there, Les says, Michael, you are exceptional. We'll rejoin you after a few beers. Thanks, Les. Yeah, and it's your holiday. Celebrate it. I know I spent almost 12 years of my life living in the United States, in Los Angeles and New York City. And if there's any group of people in the world who know how to have fun and know how to celebrate and know how to put on a party, it's Americans. And I loved my time in the States. One of the sad things about this whole quarantine thing is how the border's been shut down, and I can't wait to go down south again and to spend time down there. I'm one of those persons, one of those Canadians that loves being down in the States. And, you know, just like America has its problems, just like Canada has its problems, right? And if you look at the news lately, Canada has some pretty big issues to overcome. Issues which aren't isolated to Canada. The United States has some horrible history when it comes to its indigenous people and how they were treated as well. But I think there's, you know, don't throw stones in glass houses is what I always think. Every culture and country around the world has its problems, and I think most Americans are pretty aware of some of those issues as well, but that doesn't mean that people can't have a good, you know, celebrate some of the positive things once a year, right? Okay, so before this camera starts to turn off, I'm just gonna put my ice pack up there. Okay. Okay, so, you know, ideally, whenever you're using any kind of material and you'd want it to fully dry before you put another layer on. It's not so important when it comes to acrylic paint. Acrylic paint, you know, it's all plastic acrylic. Acrylic is a plastic, right? So it will bond to itself pretty well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep on moving forward. Again, this is not the... just because we're kind of pressed for time, you don't want to see me blow drying canvas, literally watching paint dry for 20-30 minutes here, right? So... let's take a quick second to kind of think about like what I'm gonna, you know, there's lots of different ways. Like if we go to here, so this is one of, I think this might be one of the very first versions of the flag that Jasper Johns made. Oh, and so actually this is a detail, right? So here you can see this is what his flag paintings look like up close. So you can see here's newsprint inside here. Right, he obviously did a much more complex layering of magazines and newspapers, and not just kind of nice You know, I lined mine up. You could almost kind of read these sentences in here. His are kind of like all jumbled up to kind of break up that the readability of it. But I was debating to myself about this color. If we, you know, let's. I was gonna show you how to mix the exact color, but since we're gonna paint it all white afterwards, I don't think we need to get the exact right one on here, do we? So let's just take, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put some blue in here. I'm just taking the ultramarine blue, the warm blue, right out of the tube. And I'm just going to kind of paint it on here pretty loosely. My goal is not to do a perfect job of this, because again, we're going to paint white over top of it, so I want to just kind of, when the white is over top, we're going to see a little bit of something coming through. So I want to have this blue in the general right place. Another thing for people who are kind of keen on noticing detail is that this painting was made in 1955, and he's using the 48 star flag, because Hawaii and Alaska, I don't think, became part of the United States until, or states until a little bit later on. So if anyone's like, oh, haha, he's using the wrong no, this is, we're using the one that Jasper Johns used. I wonder if we'll see the United States flag change again in our lifetimes. Like, do you think Puerto Rico will become a state? And will there be more, will they add more stars on there, or will they wait until there's a you know, it can form some kind of symmetry, and then they'll invite a bunch of states in all at once, so that we can add like another row of stars on there. It's kind of like a bit of a problem that the early, I don't know if it was the founding fathers who made this flag, Betsy Ross. Kind of, it's one of those things they probably never imagined 200 years down the line, is like, you know, they're like, oh, there's stripes and stars related to the amount of states in the Union. And it was like 13, I think, when they began. So they're like 50, 51, 48, 52. Like, what? Was there going to be that many? We're going to go all the way out to the Pacific Ocean. My goodness. Doesn't that belong to Spain and Russia? Or the indigenous people that had been there for 50,000 years prior? Okay. So that's good enough, right? It looks a little bit sloppy. We're going to paint over a lot of this, and I just sort of want to be able to see kind of hints of this kind of stuff later on. Right, again, and that blue, or the gel wasn't quite set either. And that's not why I did paint on it. We can paint some white. In fact, let's paint some white right over here so you can see I'm not intentionally avoiding anything. Although, yeah. So just like any painting we've done before, this is still considered, part of our underpainting, right? Because we're going to add another layer or layers over top of all of this. So we're just trying to give the stuff underneath the best kind of push before we take it all the way to the next level here. So in fact, if we go back to the original, let's see if there's any that's funny. I'm just looking at this. This price. It was sold for the Metropolitan Museum of Art bought it. The Met in New York bought it for $20 million in 1998. I bet this painting, if it went to auction right now, would easily sell for at least probably $180 million. So it's funny when people say like, "Oh, what a waste of money," "Oh, $20 million for one painting," and you're like, "Well, yeah, 22 years later, you could sell it for like 5 times that amount of money." I'm like, oh, so that was like one of the best investments the Metropolitan Museum ever made. Ah, okay. Okay. So I'm gonna blow dry all of that, and then we'll continue here in a second. Okay, that's probably good enough. So I'm trying to think what colors how I want to go next on this. think... See, it's interesting, when we're looking at this painting, I always have to remember this is using a different technique than we're using, right? He's painting with encaustic, which is a wax with powdered pigment mixed into it, and probably some of these layers had no pigment at all. So he could have been building up transparent, thick layers of wax, and then putting some other wax on top of it with color. I think what I'm going to do, let's put some more color on our palette here. And then, because we're going to kind of just play around with some of his different techniques, different painting techniques. Just to try to build up more texture on here, so that when that final coat or coats of white are on top, we'll see lots of things through the layers of paint. Okay, so let's zoom out here. We've got all these colors here. What I want to do is I'm going to mix a gray. So you can see we've got all these kind of bluish gray marks around in here. So let's mix a little bit of paint that we can kind of put in those places. Let's get a bit more blue. Actually, even before we just jump right into mixing some gray, why don't we just take a moment... Oops, that paintbrush is hardening up. I always got to remember to put these brushes into the water. So I want to look at... Okay, so let me find a version, one of his earlier ones around this time. So you can see this image. Oh, won't let me get any bigger. Look at this sort of cross-hatching style that he's using there. I'm going to do something kind of similar on my painting here. And I think I'm just going to use a bunch of different colors. You can see, and I'm taking some liberties. I'm going kind of fast, being a little bit sloppy. If you want to do like an exceptional job at this, you're more than welcome to do that. I don't know the origin that he had in mind for this type of cross-hatching. I don't know if he was sort of making a comment on early, like, you know, techniques that you learn when you're first learning how to make art. I don't know if he took some art classes with, you know, after being discharged from the military, you have the GI Bill, and you can go to college. I don't know if he went to art school off the top of my head, actually. Let's take some. Okay. Let's take a bit of cool yellow. So again, I have no idea if he did this cross-hatching thing on this painting. In fact, I'm just going to carry this right over here onto the stars. And I don't think, I certainly don't mean any offense to do this to the American flag, and I certainly don't think Jasper Johns did this, painted a white flag as a sign of disrespect. If he made this painting today, can you just imagine how many people would be up in arms and that he's a traitor and all this kind of stuff? I don't think anybody made those type of comments to him at the time. Like, I don't think a white flag was intended to mean, like, surrender or anything. I think he just thought it would make a really cool picture. And it actually is also based on a dream that he had. Wow, so, I mean, I kind of like what I see right here. I mean, it's definitely a little bit different. But basically what I'm trying to do is just get some stuff on here so that when I start painting, we're going to see a little bit of these things coming through the various different layers. So why don't let's go to that next step. Actually, I'll blow dry this really quickly, and then we'll start putting some white paint on things. So to do this, I'm going to use some glazing fluid. I usually use the satin one. The satin means it's not shiny. It's a matte material. Even though it often will, if you have a lot of it, like 2 to 1, so twice as much to paint, you might find it has a glossy quality already. Which, if you can imagine how glossy the glossy version would actually be, right? So that's why I tend to prefer non-glossy materials, because then I can always make it more glossy if I want to, because it's going to be a bit glossy anyway. So I put a bunch of that material here and just a little bit of, and not trying to mix all the white in. In fact, let's get a little bit more. So kind of quite a high percentage of gloss, or of matte glazing fluid to white paint, right? And then as I paint this again, I'm going to do this kind of similar, oops, you can see some of this pink is going to come through. I don't mind if it picks up some of these colors along the way. You know, and the question would be like, why go to all of this trouble to put all that collage material down? And now look, I can't really see any newspaper on there. Like, do I even need to do that step? No, you don't need to do that step at all. You know, if I was maybe being a little bit more careful, I could keep some of that text. Maybe some of it will come through. Maybe I'll use a bit of sandpaper and sand some paint back off. Sometimes it doesn't matter what the viewer can see. It's what the artist knows happened, right? And as long as you're happy with the end result and also the process involved to get there, then what does it, then, I don't know, it doesn't make any difference to me, right? Okay, so that's one layer. Now, ideally, I would have spent a little more time on the stars so I could actually, but I'm going to kind of simulate a bit of the effect of the stars here. I think I'm going to paint some of the edges kind of a darker, maybe even a black in some places before we get too far away here. Okay, so I'm just going to blow dry that. And maybe, I'm not sure how well it's coming across, but I don't know if you can see the stripes on there because of the heavy gel we put down to begin with. Okay, so I'm just going to continue that again. Maybe this time I'm going to mix a bit of yellow into the white. So I want a bit of this kind of, if we look at the painting, it's got a bit of this kind of yellowy quality to it. And I'm kind of just brushing it in a little bit haphazardly. Okay, so I just added a little bit more yellow and glazing fluid into some white just to continue this. So the purpose here is not to completely obliterate everything we just did. It's to kind of, we're layering things up so that we see those layers, but not completely. There's hints of it coming through. All right. Okay. So I'm really happy with where we are right now. And in fact, you could probably just call it a day right now if you wanted. I'm going to bring back a little bit of the details, just like he did. I'm going to add some of these, the lines. I'm going to bring some of the stars back out a little bit, so that you can kind of see a little bit more of that kind of stuff. But, and so to do that, I'm just going to I'm going to mix a bunch of colors together to get kind of a darker color. Kind of just basically a gray is what I want. And since I got all this paint on here, let's just use it all up. Okay, as I said, I can always use black to do this kind of stuff, but I always prefer to use the color, especially if I've got this paint on my palette, which will go to waste if I don't do something with it. Okay, so let's Let's get a little bit more white. I'm just going to mix a bit of this right here. A little bit kind of on the purpley side of things. Let's take a bit more yellow, turn it a bit more gray. Okay. Actually, let's go. I'm going to take one of my smaller brushes now. Now all this is pretty tacky. This is where having your original to kind of refer back to can be kind of helpful. Just to kind of, I'm going to put it right next to my painting so that I can refer to it. Because what I want to do now is I'm just going to kind of paint a little bit of some of these stars back in. Now I could have just done this with the way that I applied the texture, the gel. So what we're doing is we're going to do a bit of like a trompe-l'oeil here, like a fake. We're going to fake it out like these shadows are there. And we'll just, by the way, what we decide to paint out or keep will reflect that. So if you've been watching throughout the whole time, you've probably seen this painting go through quite the numbers of transitions, right? We've gone from having collage over here to a flag that almost looked like the American flag, to then kind of covering it with a whole bunch of other colors, to then painting it all white, and a lot of that disappearing, to where we're at right now. So my goal is not to make perfect lines, nice sharp lines. I mean, well, I mean, you could certainly do that if you like. Just to kind of simulate what he did here. And then the last few things we're going to do is we're going to take some white back and kind of go back over everything that we have here. So I was going to put a border around the edge, and I just decided just to not do that and just keep on going like this. So. Okay. I mean, I quite like how everything's turned out so far. Okay, I'll let these brushes sit in there for a second. And then I'm going to blow dry this. Okay, so we are getting pretty close. I think now, so I'd say we're like 90% done. What I want to do now is just clean up the stars, and then just do a little bit, a last glaze with white over top of everything, right? But otherwise, I think we're pretty close, and I really like I love the texture that we see here. It's not quite super evident. It's not super thick, but there's definitely some. Let me see. I tilt it up. You can kind of see all the little lumps and bumps and stuff on there. Let's see if you can see it this way. Yeah, you can see all these kind of bumps in there. Cool. So, I'm going to take some of this warm yellow again and some white. I could kind of complicate this and make it a little bit more on the brown side of things, but actually, well, as I say that, and I'm like, well, maybe I should do a bit more of that. There we go. That's a bit more on the brown side. Well, and then I scooped some more red in there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is kind of more carefully touch up the stars. So let's zoom in. Okay. So really what I'm just going to kind of come around here and do is just sharpen up and I'm not trying to get all the stars perfect. I just want to be at least able to see parts of each star. Let's see, there's a bit of color on there. That's all right. This is pretty hard to paint on such a highly textured surface, so give yourself a bit of a break. You don't have to worry again about doing it perfectly. Okay, so then I'm just going to kind of continue a little bit of this. And actually I'll clean up not just inside the stars, but some of the stuff outside the stars as well. Then I think I'm going to go back and do even a little bit more outlining in a few minutes. Now I have no idea if this is anything like what he would have done. He was using such a different process that it's possible that there's some overlap, but let's zoom out a bit. So again, this is just like white and some warm yellow. Let's put a bit more of that on there. See, I find this like a lot of fun. I can imagine some people are like, oh my goodness, painting like this is tough, and it's like, I'm losing my mind, I'm losing my place. You know, it's totally, each artist sort of brings their own different kind of technique to things, and part of what I want people to do when they're watching is, by experimenting and trying different techniques, is seeing if they stumble on something that they're like, whoa, yeah, this is the kind of painting that is like fun, like I can just play around. And I know there's some other people who have very different kind of feeling about doing this kind of a painting. It might make them feel really, uncomfortable because it's just too loose and crazy and wild and experimental. So it's just whatever works for you, whatever brings you joy, whatever sparks joy, as Mary Kondo says, right? Okay, some of those stars being so red I don't like. Actually, before I paint those out, I'm just going to go back to my darker color. I'm going to add, so this is this darker color I mixed earlier with just like basically all the remnants on my page or my palette. Put a little bit of glazing fluid there just to thin it out a bit. It's kind of seizing up. It's pretty hot in here, and so I just want something that I can paint with a little bit easier. I don't mind if it's not quite as opaque. And I'm going to make it a bit more on the bluey side of things. So this is kind of intended to suggest this is the shadows from heavy texture. So probably want to have more of the shadows on the bottom. I was even thinking of using like, you know, like gold stars teachers give kids. You could probably just stack a whole bunch of them in these places to help build up that texture. I just didn't have time to go buy some of those kinds of things, but it would work pretty well. Okay. Okay. Let me see, just a few more of these. And then I'm going to go back over, do a little bit of glazing. But we're pretty close to being done here. As I said, there's been times throughout today's painting where I thought, oh, okay, we could stop right there. Ah, well, you know what I'm just going to do? Oh, you know, I think that's a good thing. When you're making a painting and you keep feeling like you could stop, but you decide to keep on going, and you can't figure out when to stop, that's a pretty good thing. Like, if you're feeling like, wow, I just want to keep on painting on it, it's making me happy. There is a totally different opinion about that. There's, I remember reading about Ernest Hemingway would talk about, like, as soon as he knew what he was going to write, like towards the end of the day, that's when he would stop, so that he wouldn't sit down at the typewriter the next day not knowing what to write. He always wanted to kind of have, you know, the next few footsteps ready so that he could launch into those. Okay, so I'm gonna do one last glaze. It's gonna take some of this white. I like this kind of off white here, so I'm gonna keep it. Some glazing fluid. Stir this in well. I'm just going to put more glazing fluid in there like that. Okay, and let's just see them side by side just so I can... So that's maybe a little bit too intense. In fact, I'm just going to take a rag, wipe off that paint that I used for mixing, and then just kind of come in here with much thinner white. It's hard to tell because we're mixing glazing fluid into white paint, and that glazing fluid starts white and then it goes completely transparent. So I'm expecting, even though it looks really, really white right now, for the areas that are very white to become more transparent as it dries. So let's do the same thing in here. You know, we kind of want this to be pretty subtle. Including these lines. As I go over, I'm going to start going over a bit of the darker lines. And it's kind of up to you as to when you want to stop here. Oops. Okay, I mean, his has got a bit more of some green stuff going on. I actually did bump up the contrast in the image on the left, so it's actually a little bit more, probably closer to what I've got here than, and if anything, just more white, right? I've got a lot of just gonna take whatever little bit of white I got left. Okay, I might have gone a little bit too far with that white. You can always take like a rag and then just sort of, if you want, just kind of delicately kind of wipe a bit off. All right, let's take this side here. I mean, it's definitely something different. This is a very different process than we've used thus far, because but I'm pretty happy with the way that turned. Actually, you know what? Now I kind of feel like I wanted to put a few pieces of white back in here. Just taking some pure white here and just going to put a few little highlights back onto some of these stars. Okay. I guess he's got a bit of white in some of the messy areas in between. Ah, I think that's good enough. Okay. So let's zoom out one last time so we can see that. Okay. So my name, as always, stays the same. Okay. So, I'm happy with that. I could have spent longer on it and it would look better, but I think, you know, what I really want to do is just demonstrate a little bit about how to use the gel medium and how you can get like this texture on it, which I think is really important for this type of a work, especially considering how wax kind of builds up like that. But you don't need it to do what we've done. Okay, so I am doing live streams. I'm going to do one tomorrow on Monday, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So I'm going to do 4 Tom Thomson paintings over the course of the next week, leading up until July 8th, which is 7th or 8th, July 8th, 1917 is when he died. Under very mysterious circumstances. I'm making a graphic novel about this right now. So maybe some of the answers will be in the graphic novel. You'll have to read it to find out. Okay, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me and for painting along another episode. This special American Independence Day holiday episode. If you're out there celebrating, or you know people who are, drive safely. There's probably a lot of people out there driving around, had a little bit to drink, so just take your time. Be careful, and enjoy whatever you're enjoying responsibly. And we will see you tomorrow. And try to stay warm or cold, depending on where you are. I'm planning to drink lots of water. I don't know what's going on. I'm going to take the rest of the day off myself and have a little bit of celebration. Okay, so we'll see you guys in a few, probably, less than 24 hours for our Tom Thomson painting. I'm super excited about that. That's going to be a lot of fun. Okay, everybody, enjoy the rest of your evening. We will see you then tomorrow. Good afternoon.